going to go ahead and get started with the first presentation. And the first presentation is from our team, the marijuana policy team, to sort of kick off the whole 2 days and sort of give a framework of where we are and what we do and how we work to coordinate all the other agencies who are also going to be speaking to you. So, is it on? Is that better? Okay, so we're going to get started. This is our team, the Office of Marijuana Policy team. We're going to first start and tell a little bit about ourselves and what we do on a high level and kind of set everything up for the rest of the presenters as we go forward. So first for introductions, my name is Ashely Kilroy, and I'm the Executive Director of Marijuana Policy for Denver.
Molly Duplashane, the Deputy Director of Marijuana Policy for Denver.
Hi, I'm Dan Rowland. I'm the Communications Director.
Hi, Marley Bordowski. I'm the City Attorney's Office Assistant Director in the PACE Prosecution and Code Enforcement Section.
And I'm Natia Ingram. I am the Management Analyst.
All right, so we're going to each tell you a little bit about our office and then what each of us do. And then towards the end, we're going to do sort of a case study. We'll go over one issue that we dealt with this year, which was a pesticides issue, and many of you might have heard about it. That will be discussed in more detail later, but we're just going to discuss from a process way, how we handled it. So next slide. So when marijuana first became legal, recreational marijuana became legal in Denver on January 1st, 2014, the mayor was the first elected official to decide he really felt like we needed one single point of contact to oversee marijuana. He hired me as the Executive Director of Marijuana Policy, and then we built out our team, the Office of Marijuana Policy, which includes me, Molly, our deputy, Dan, our communications person, Natia, who does data and business analysis, and Marley, who is a city attorney assigned to and reports to the city attorney, but supports us. In addition, that first year, as we were developing our small team and working out of the mayor's office with some of the marijuana funds we had, we hired an additional 37 employees throughout the city. And those 37 employees are working as inspectors or additional lawyers or additional licensing techs so that we could get the job done with regard to marijuana. And also, as I'm sitting here, last night we met a couple of you out at dinner, and I think that when we say this is what all of us do, a lot of people that I met last night, you do all of this. You know, one of you is doing a combination of all of these jobs. In Denver, we're lucky to have our 5 team each doing these discrete job duties. We do have about 660 citizens in Denver. We have over 1,000 marijuana licenses, and we have those licenses operating out of over 440 unique locations. So to sort of give you perspective of the workload. So our job in the Office of Marijuana Policy is first policy, second coordination, and third to be that external stakeholder contact. With policy, our team has worked on policy from the federal, state, and local level. With the federal government, we've all worked in various capacities, trying to work to some extent on the federal banking issue and reaching out to our Colorado delegation. Marley has worked directly with the EPA on the pesticides issue. At the state level, we've each worked on different policy issues. I served on a state task force that oversaw the edible issue. We were working on labeling and packaging and dosing and the newest rule that just came out about how do you ensure that marijuana is recognizable outside of a package. Now we have the stamp. Molly also worked on production management task force with the state, which deals with how do we know how much marijuana is being produced, what's the supply out there, and what's the demand, and how do we ensure that we're making sure that production and supply are equal so that we don't overproduce, so that marijuana goes to the black market. Then on the local level, we've worked on a number of other local issues, including our team passed a ban on hash oil extractions at homes. So in Denver now, you can no longer use a solvent-based extraction process outside of a licensed facility. But we have a little caveat, except with alcohol, and if you don't heat it to a certain level and you're only using a certain amount of alcohol per extraction. We also adopted some other rules limiting the size of non-licensed grows. So what could have been just a non-licensed sort of recreational grow, or what could be a caregiver model. And what we passed an ordinance in Denver saying that in any event, at no time, if you're not a licensed grow, you can never have more than 36 plants in a non-licensed facility. And if you're home and in a residential area, no more than 12 plants in a home. So those are some of the some of the policy things we've done. We also work on coordination of the agencies. You would be surprised, or maybe not, since you're all getting into it, about how many agencies actually work on marijuana every day. We have our Department of Excise and Licenses that processes the licenses. Then we have our fire department that goes in and inspects for fire safety and hazardous materials and hazardous processes. We have neighborhood inspection services. We have zoning officials. We have building officials. We have our electrical inspectors. Then we also have lawyers handling all kinds of issues. We even have Treasury works on marijuana issues to the extent that they needed to develop some processes to ensure that they were able to collect the appropriate amount of taxes when these are all tax businesses. We even have park rangers are also involved in this with people smoking marijuana in parks, or our 311 operators had to be educated on marijuana. So it really touches a whole host of agencies, and we help to sort of coordinate them and convene them and keep them at the table, keep them advised of our direction and the mayor's direction on how we are managing marijuana. And then the last thing is we serve as a point of contact for external stakeholders, like a lot of you. And as we were saying, I know we've spoken to a lot of you separately even before this. We serve as a contact for the industry. We serve as a contact for neighborhoods, for our healthcare partners, for just the state. We speak very regularly with the state. So what we did here on this little wheel, that wheel sort of outlines kind of what I just said. It's sort of the different agencies and the different subject matters that we work with. At the top, you see legal, the lawyers and Marley, marijuana licensing, that will be the Department of Excise and Licenses, and Stacy Locks is our Director of Excise and Licenses, and she'll be leading a seminar or session. You know, our fire department deals with the fire issues, and it goes around to show all the different agencies and their functions and how they relate to marijuana. And what we've done is built our agenda for the next 2 days off of these topics. And you'll hear from each of these areas. Now, that's how we've got it organized here, but there are still, we started saying, well, we could put another bubble here, and what about a bubble here? And what about, where does the Department of Ag go? Where does the federal government go? There's still a lot more issues and players and stakeholders that aren't depicted on this wheel, but I think it'll give us a great outline as we go forward the next 2 days. So now I'll turn it over to Molly, or Marley.
Okay, so I'm Marley Bordowski. I'm an assistant director in the prosecution section, but I'm the point person for the Denver City Attorneys for all things marijuana. So kind of how Ashely was talking about the number of agencies involved, that marijuana touches every single agency in the city. We learned very early on that marijuana touches every single section of our city attorney's office, and we needed to have someone pull that all together. So we were looking at it as from a united front and approaching all these issues from a united front. So in addition to all of the agencies that Ashely was talking about, I have lawyers that staff the hearings in the licensing section of our excise and licensing department. I also have lawyers that are actually trying the criminal cases. We have hash oil cases based upon our ordinance that Ashely described. I'm counseling and mentoring those lawyers to get them through these sometimes very tough cases. So it touches all parts. I've got human services lawyers where they're dealing with children, drug-endangered children in homes, all of those kinds of issues. So that's the reason that I exist. My position exists because we recognize very early on how widespread this issue is, and we needed to deal with it correctly and properly and as a united city front. So this map, so changing gears here, just a real brief overview. Probably a lot of you are familiar with where we are in marijuana laws across the nation, but this gives you kind of a pictorial of where we are. It almost changed. I thought I was going to have to change out this slide, but Ohio did not vote in recreational marijuana. It was on the ballot on Tuesday. I think there are now 14 other states that are looking at these kinds of initiatives for 2016. So whether you think it's coming to your jurisdiction or not, or whether it already has, it's probably coming. And what I think you're going to hear throughout this entire symposium is you need to get your regulations in place. You need to have these conversations and these thought processes before they hit you, not after. So a lot of what Denver did is we reacted to things as we learned about them. We didn't understand hash oil. Who knew? I didn't know how hash oil was created. We learned boots on the ground. So that's part of what I like to do, is help you think through these things that you might be facing down the road. So in Colorado, this is kind of another pictorial of how it happened here. In 2000 is when Amendment 20 passed. That's legalized the medical use of marijuana. For 10 years after that, it went completely unregulated, which is kind of one of the part of the problems we're dealing with now. There was zero regulation on the ground for 10 years. Then in 2012, Amendment 64 passed, which legalized small personal use of marijuana on the recreational level. We have since, on the local level and on the state level, developed regulations around recreational marijuana. While we did that, we also tweaked some of the medical stuff. There still are differences, as the Colorado folks in the room know very well. There's differences between the medical side and the recreational side, and we continue to respond to those. In Denver, that last box that says RMJ transition phase, we call it the transition phase, where during that period of time between 2014, 2015, only medical marijuana businesses that were operating in good standing as of October 1st of 2013 could then either fully convert to recreational or add recreational. That transition phase, as the ordinances are written now, is scheduled to expire at the end of this year. But that's one of the particular wrinkles of Denver law that doesn't necessarily apply across Colorado. I think this slide kind of puts in words what I already said with the pictorial. Amendment 64 passed in Colorado by 55% of the vote and by 66% of the vote in Denver, which is why our mayor decided we were going to go ahead and opt in. There were provisions in Amendment 64 that allowed jurisdictions to opt out. Our mayor decided to opt in, given the 66% of our voters wanted it, and so we went full bore to implement robust regulatory schemes and enforcement. If we were going to opt in, we were going to do it right. This is, again, another pictorial. There's a memo out there that kind of is our guiding light, is Ashely's guiding light, and anything we do, we talk about the Cole memo, and are we holding true to the 8 priorities of the Cole memo. I'm not going to bore you with all of that right now. I'll talk more about it in my presentation tomorrow, but basically in 2013, you can do the next slide. The Department of Justice issued what's now famously known as the Cole Memo, basically saying that they weren't going to interfere with states that were implementing legalized marijuana, and so long as they had a robust regulatory and enforcement scheme in place. In that memo, they laid out, the Department of Justice laid out 8 priorities, and those are our guiding light. The first of them being preventing the diversion of marijuana to minors. And then there's others that we always are looking back to when we talk about policy or ordinances or anything that we do here on a local level. We use that as our guiding light. So just basically an overview, in Colorado you have to have both a state license and a local license. At the state level, the state licenses are issued and regulated by the Marijuana Enforcement Division, which is housed in the Department of Revenue, and I think you'll hear from them tomorrow morning. In the local level, the local licenses are issued and regulated by our Department of Excise and Licenses, which also issues all of our other local licenses, peddlers, liquor license, all of the 100-some local licenses that we also have. Major features of the Denver Retail Marijuana Code. I think I touched on a lot of these right now. We have a local licensing system. We have the 2-year transition period that I talked about before. Also, one of the funny things about Denver's licensing system, instead of, we use the licensing scheme, the local licensing scheme, which references our zoning code. So where marijuana businesses can be located in our city is actually in the licensing code. It was kind of a strange way to do that, but it was a conscious decision on the part of our city government. But where businesses can be licensed in our city is housed in the licensing code. We also have public hearing requirements for recreational marijuana. Those are for new licenses and transfers of location. If anyone's familiar with liquor licensing, those are called needs and desires hearings. We didn't have those for the first 2 years of the transition phase. We will start those types of hearings next year. But basically, those public hearings are looking at the impact of the new business on public health, welfare, and safety. So that's kind of just some major features of our code and the things that that I deal with daily from a legal perspective. And I think that is it for me.
Okay, so just to lay the groundwork a little bit more and talk some more history of how we got to where we are today, I'm going to talk a little bit about budget and revenue. So in November of 2013, Amendment 64 had already been passed, and then the voters were faced with another ballot issue asking them if they wanted to place an additional sales tax on retail marijuana. And they approved that, so they placed a 3.5% special sales tax just on retail marijuana. And in the ballot initiative, the language was that would fund regulation, enforcement, and education, and then operating, improving the city and its facilities. And so then we kind of used that ballot language to set those kind of pillars as our guiding principles for the work that we do in policy and regulation. And then, so with that 3.5% sales tax, in Denver, retail marijuana is taxed at a total of 21.15%. That includes the 3.5 special sales tax, the standard sales tax of 3.65%, which is on both medical and retail. The state also has an additional retail sales tax, and that's at 10%. And then they have their standard sales tax at 2.9%, and then 2 other standard sales tax that are on everything, which is 1% for our transportation district and then 0.1% for our cultural facilities. So 21% for retail and then 7.65% for medical. And then this gives you an idea of gross sales over the last 18 months or so. Looking at the beginning of 2014 when retail marijuana started, you can see the blue line is retail. So throughout 2014, as more and more businesses started to get licensed, the gross sales increased over time, passing medical sales at the beginning of 2015 of this year. So one interesting thing that we thought we would see, which we did not, which was a decline in medical sales. There's some peaks and valleys if you look throughout the 18 months, but over the last couple months, we've still been seeing an increase in medical sales as well. And then this is just the same kind of numbers in a little different way, looking at the total sales year to date. So you can see that in 2014, medical sales were higher than retail. And then in 2015, retail sales are exceeding medical sales and both are increasing with about a 5% year-to-date increase for medical and a 53% increase for retail, mostly being that there's just more and more shops online now than there were throughout 2014. And then, so coming back to where that money goes within the city of Denver, we have 5 different revenue sources for marijuana. There is the special sales tax, which is that 3.5% sales tax. There we get a state share back. The state shares a portion of their 10% special sales tax back to local jurisdictions that have retail marijuana. And then we have licensing revenue and that standard sales tax. And I think that's the 5 of them. So if you look, and all of those funds go into the general fund, but we kind of set aside or look at the state share back and the special retail sales tax as kind of dedicated towards regulation, enforcement, and education. So in 2014, just those 2 portions of the revenue, the special sales tax and the state share back, was about $7.5 million, and we're looking at about $10 million for those to in 2015. And so as we talk over the next couple of days, most of what resources that we have allocated towards the work that we do comes from that 10 million, those two revenue sources. And then, so in November, like I said, in November of 2013, we set up that 3.5% sales tax, but at that point, the 2014 budget was already complete and finished. So there was a small portion, some small resources put into the 2014 budget for marijuana regulation. But at that time, we didn't know a lot, and we didn't know where the resources were going to be needed, and we didn't know if the 3.5% sales tax would be approved by voters. So when Ashely and I started, one of the very first things we did was we turned to our city partnering agencies, and we asked them where they were needing additional resources, and we kind of did a full budget proposal submittal process, and did a budget supplemental for $4.7 million out to all of our partnering agencies, using those those priorities that were in the ballot initiative. So education, enforcement, and regulation. And then we added a few little more in 2015 as we started to learn more and more about how this is all going to look. And so we added some public health funds there also. And then this pie chart is, I know, very crowded and confusing, but it just gives you another picture of all the different departments and agencies that we work with in the city. So of the $6.9 million that is allocated across the city for marijuana regulation and enforcement in 2015, these are all the different pieces of the pie and the different pieces of the puzzle that we work with and coordinate and manage throughout the city.
And now, Natia?
Yep. So I'm going to do a very brief overview of the importance of data in this new world of regulated marijuana. And really, no matter what your jurisdiction's current situation is, whether you're already grappling with legalization or you're headed that way in the future, everything really boils down to three questions, which is first, how is legalization going to impact my community? Second, what are the negative consequences going to be, and how are we going to mitigate them? And third, what resources is my jurisdiction going to need in order to manage legalization? So unfortunately, because this is such a new phenomenon, this legalized marijuana, we're in a virtual data desert. There is no data. So we're governing blind in the face of these very important questions, and that is not the ideal state to be in. So how do we kind of move, the question is, how do we move towards getting some data in our arsenal? Okay, so essentially, the key is, if you can, capture data as soon as possible. Establish your baselines before legalization strikes. Otherwise, you're going to be sorry. So an example would be Denver, who typically follows best data practices, has DUID, which is driving under the influence of drug data from 2014 and 2015 that says in each year, this is exactly how many citations were issued for incidences involving marijuana. So we can tell you, is the number going up, is the number going down, but what we'll never be able to tell you is what was legalization's impacts on DUIDs. We don't know, because before 2014, before legalization, that data was tracked with marijuana lumped in with all the other drugs. So that is kind of this scenario we've gotten ourselves into, is something we hope you can avoid if you haven't started legalization yet, by starting your baselines now. That's very important. And when you do start collecting your data, there's, again, three big questions, and that's first, do you track marijuana at all? Second, do you track it separate from other things? And third, do you track it in a way that makes it easy to report? So that would be a radio button, a checkbox, a drop-down selection. Because quite frankly, if your marijuana is grouped in with other drugs, or if it is in an open text field is where you're going to find the word marijuana, it's going to be, if not impossible, very, very difficult for you to ever use that data. So start thinking about this as soon as you can, and if you need to modify your databases and how you capture data, it can be done. It's just going to require a little bit of perseverance and money. So just a couple of thoughts on common things people want to know about. They want to know about crime. They want to know about the economic impacts. They want to know about how many fire incidents were related to marijuana, how many hospital visits happened because somebody accidentally ate a brownie. They want to know how many schools, how many people were suspended in schools. And they want to know, of course, what are use perception and their usage rates towards marijuana. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to, one more slide. Okay, so when it comes to actually getting your data and what do you do next, the idea is that data should help you see where you're doing really well, and then it should help you see where you're not doing so well. And ultimately, data can lead you to a solution. So another great example in Denver is over the summer, our fire inspectors decided to start measuring the atmosphere of extraction facilities. So I'm sure many of you know extraction facilities tend to use flammable gases such as butane as their extraction medium, which can be dangerous. So the fire inspectors went in and they put a gas meter up next to those machines, and what they found was that in many of the facilities, the levels of butane in the air was greater than the flash point. Okay, so that's the point where if a spark occurs, you basically, your air light's on fire and you have an explosion. So that was a problem. With those measurements, they brought them back and we were able to see we have a serious life safety hazard on our hands. And it was very apparent very quickly because of that data. And then the data led us to the solution, which is in an environment in this country experiencing those levels of butane, you should be a Class 1, Division 1, explosion-proof room, and that was not the requirement. So again, data helped us identify what the problem was, and it helped us identify the solution we needed to move towards. So data can be very, very useful. And then, slide. Okay, and so tomorrow at the data collection and tracking session, we're going to be talking about a few things. One is, what data does Denver track? What data does the state of Colorado track? And then we're going to be talking about some of the challenges we face getting at that data and also the platforms that we use to display that data. So this screenshot here is a picture of a dashboard, a business intelligence dashboard that the city has built, which allows decision makers from the city to log on to this website and see a number of marijuana metrics anytime from anywhere, manipulate that data, filter that data, export that data, print these graphs, use that data, and this has really been a game changer for us, which may be a good model for all of you. So tomorrow, hope to see you all, and we'll give you a little bit more information.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say, first of all, really quick, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. Like everything else, this is our first time doing this, and we weren't sure if we were going to have 5 people or 50. So we're really pleased to see everyone here and do this. My overall message as the communications person for this is that everyone wants to know what's going on, and it doesn't matter the size of your community or where you're located. This implementation touches everyone in your community, and it's very attractive to the media. So knowing your audience is very critical, but the point is that the audience is huge, and how you parse through that will really make your communications director or the people that you have on your team who are responsible for communications, it'll make their lives easier if they know all of the different stakeholders that want the information, that need the information. When it comes to what's going on, the story, as we know, is still being written, and Sean touched on that. The Denver Post touched on that a couple of weeks ago, saying, you know what, this isn't a done deal yet. We can't make any definitive judgments today about how this has gone or what the long-term impacts will be. And so my message would be that you have a great story to tell in your own community. And no matter what people think about marijuana, whether or not it should be legal, what you can focus on is the implementation details that are unique to the needs and desires of your community. The story is how you're implementing it for your residents, right? It's not the study that came out by some group that's against marijuana, or some other study that came out a week later by some group that's for marijuana. It's the details of how you're making your community better and stronger on the ground. So in our communication session tomorrow, which I understand is up against law enforcement and public safety, so, you know, not saying that their pictures are going to be better, but they've got some cool pictures. But I will get into several things, and it's parsing through what that audience looks like. Obviously, internal communications is a huge part of what we do. And the elected officials piece of that is very important when we are making these changes as we are learning and getting better. Some things do go through council, and there's a certain playbook and a certain amount of nuance that is involved with how to do that, and I'm happy to share some of those stories. You know, I think something that's indicative of probably all of our communities is something a council person told me a while back, which was, I absolutely support this, I just don't want to see any stores in my district. So those are the sort of complexities that you're dealing with. Department heads, trusted advisors, what I mean by that is that core group, however you assemble it, of leaders across your organization that can be a sounding board for policy ideas, that can give you a perspective that maybe you hadn't heard before, or just see it from the Parks and Recreation point of view, or see it from the city attorney's point of view, or how this looks for the mayor and some of his supporters. Building that sort of core group of advisors is absolutely critical, as are the team members. And what we mean by that is the hundreds of employees that make up our marijuana management team. People that really, as a communications person, are the ones that I am going to constantly to find out what's actually happening. You know, when the Business Journal calls you and says, how much energy are these grow facilities using? You may not know that off the top of your head. So you have to go to your team and find those answers out, and find out what's being done there. And that kind of input is really critical. And good old external communications. So, you know, we've been through the Jimmy Fallon late night jokes. Like we've gotten that sort of out of the way. You know, like it's all, oh, they're going to rename the team the Denver McNuggets or whatever. Like we've gone through that cycle, I think, I hope. And now it's more about implementation and what are the impacts. And you know, just a brief list of all these different sort of groups that you're responsible with for communicating with. Of course, the industry, however that looks in your state or county. The media, this is something that no matter how mundane the administrative change that you're going through council may be, it will get covered, maybe even for 2 or 3 days. Something with, you know, you're removing a surety bond insurance requirement, for instance. If it was for any other business license type, wouldn't get covered, but it's 2 days of stories because it's marijuana. So just real quick, I think it was Tuesday of this week, I got 3 calls in the space of about 10 minutes, and it basically sums up my job. One was, hey, I didn't buy the tour for the symposium, but I want to go on the tour. How do I do that? The second one was Ana Cabrera from CNN doing a package on the pesticide issue and following up on some of the details there. We spoke for a minute, and as soon as I was done with her, it was a resident who told me, I don't know what's in my pot, and I can't read these labels. There's too much stuff on them, so I'm just going to start growing it at home. And I said, okay. And she said, I'm just going to do it in the backyard. I'm sick of it. And I said, well, don't do it in the backyard. It has to be in a fully enclosed lock space. And she said, oh, really? And it was this sort of conversation that came about, oh, yeah, you know, we have all this information on our website. Let me point you to the right direction and kind of just bring you up to speed on some of the laws here in Denver. And, you know, she assures me she's just going to grow 6 plants inside. We'll see. But again, 10 minutes, 3 completely different audiences there. And that's what you have to look forward to.
Okay, so now we'll switch tracks a bit and sort of give you an idea of how we do our jobs and why we have the type of job duties we have. And we'll talk about the pesticides issue. So the pesticides issue is something that was first brought to our attention in February of this year, and we're still working on it. If you guys picked up the Denver Post today, there were more articles today about continued recalls. Pesticides is something, as a city, we don't regulate pesticides. We're not experts in pesticides. The fire department does have authority with regard to storage of hazardous materials, and our Department of Environmental Health has authority to protect people from unsafe food products. So it was around in February that the fire department is in some of these grows, and they start noticing that some of the pesticides that are being used say on the label, not for use indoors, not for use on edible products, and a couple other things that raise red flags for them. The fire department was talking to Marley. Marley her antenna starts going up. This is a problem. I set a meeting with me and Molly and the fire department, and we all got together, and the fire department briefed us on it, something that wasn't even on our radar, didn't know anything about pesticides. We kind of identified the players. We had met on Wednesday, and on Friday afternoon, we had the State Department of Ag in a meeting with us. We had the Marijuana Enforcement Division. Some of them are here with us today. The State Marijuana Enforcement Division in a room with us. We had the fire department. We had our Department of Environmental Health. We had Lieutenant Henning from police, Marley and a bunch of our lawyers. And we're just working through it. We're just having to we're hearing from the first time from the Department of Ag what our tolerance is, or at least that was the first time I had heard of it. What are these rules? What are these rules? Where's the jurisdiction? Why is somebody doing this and somebody not doing this? What's going on with, the state getting their testing up and running, and how does that affect what we're doing? So we had these big meetings, and we're just gleaning all the information as Molly, the deputy, is, kind of frantically writing it down, and got a high-level sort of action plan together. Then, as Molly and me, sort of the policy people, the organizers and conveners, I go back to my office, I notify the mayor's office, I notify city council, I started calling industry representatives to let them know that, hey, we don't know where this is going, but we know this is a problem, and we're going to start moving on it, and let's work together. I'll keep you informed, you keep me informed. It sounds sort of calm right now as I'm saying it, but it was not calm. I mean, we had industry representatives calling our chief of staff. We had people calling city council people. We had industry saying, what the heck is Denver doing? Nobody else is doing this. The EPA is not involved. They don't have jurisdiction to be involved. What are they doing? And we're sort of like, well, we're figuring it out. So I'll pass it over to Molly, and she can kind of say the working parts that she was overseeing with the other agencies that work with us.
So as Ashely said, I think we realized pretty quickly that this was going to be a complicated issue and that it was going to be a pretty big deal as well. So, and we kind of knew that we were going to have to approach this in a very collaborative way because there were so many stakeholders across the city and externally involved as well. So we started convening meetings, developing an action plan, kind of breaking them out by subject matter. So we had, an action plan with the fire department listed and what their assigned duties were going to be. And we pulled in meetings and had subject matter experts from each of the departments there, giving us their feedback and then assigning them tasks, going back and saying, can you research this and tell us how it will impact the operations and the safety, and what will it mean for the impact of what you're looking for when you're out doing inspections, or how will we ensure the safety of the consumers, that type of thing. So our action plans were divided by agency but also by issue. So we were looking at the safety of the consumers, we were looking at the safety of our employees, talking about when our city inspectors and our police officers and our firefighters are out in these facilities, are they safe? Do they have the personal protective equipment that they need to be entering these facilities? We were talking about city infrastructure, and is that being fully protected? So we had all these different subject matters and different individual issues that we needed our players and our partners working with and researching. So as Ashely said, we were the conveners, and we provided that big picture view to make sure that all the different pieces of the puzzle were fitting together and talking to each other.
I'm pretty sure you guys still don't know the emotional level that was going on earlier this year. I don't think they've quite portrayed it, but it was like off the charts. We didn't know. I'm a career prosecutor. I've been a prosecutor for 20 years. I know how to try a murder case. Pesticides is not my bag. It never was on my radar, but I took a crash course. Thank you, John Scott. But none of us knew anything about pesticides, and there wasn't any reason for us to know about pesticides, because in Colorado, pesticide use is regulated under the Pesticide Applicators Act, and those kinds of cases, if there are violations, are handled by the Department of Agriculture and prosecuted by the Attorney General's office. So it was completely out of our wheelhouse. What we did have authority, so we're scrambling. I'm scrambling to learn about the law, educate myself about all of it, and it's complicated. There are lawyers in the room. No, it's complicated. I forgot all that stuff in law school. So this was a big drinking from the fire hose experience for all of us. We discovered early on that we have authority in Denver, and you may not have this same authority in your jurisdictions, but we have a very robust food program code and another code that's kind of a more broad ordinance that allows us to take action when there's a possible threat to public health and public safety. And so we had that jurisdictional authority to protect our consumers and our employees, but our consumers from a possible pesticide-contaminated product. And so that's where our authority I get those confused. We had no authority over the use of the pesticide, but we had absolute authority over the product itself and whether it was contaminated or not. I can tell you that very quickly, I think middle of March, Department of Environmental Health, that is the enforcer of that particular ordinance, went out to the various locations, the various grow facilities that fire had identified as having possible problem pesticides on site. They did their own investigation, and we ended up in March and April of this year putting holds on 11 facilities, plants, for possible pesticide contamination and risk that posed to public health. You've probably seen in the news, it probably surpassed 100,000 plants at some point that were on hold. Nothing was ever condemned, nothing was ever ordered to be destroyed, but we did put them on hold so that we can determine if they posed a threat to public health. At the end of April, we put holds on 60,000 plants at the largest grow facility in Denver. Shortly thereafter, we were sued, not by that facility, but by two of the earlier hold facilities, claiming that we overstepped our authority, we were outside of our jurisdiction, and all of those kinds of things. We successfully fought that lawsuit in April and May of this year, and the judge ruled in our favor, saying that we were absolutely within our authority to put these contaminated plants on hold until we made some determinations about whether they posed a risk to public health or not. All of that sounds really calm too, but it was not. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday. We went to court on a Wednesday. We had less than 24 hours to scramble attorneys, resources, witnesses, evidence to try to combat this lawsuit. So it was literally like drinking from a fire hose for, 6 months. Ultimately, those 11 facilities now have worked through their holds, and we released the holds once the pesticide residues degraded to a level that we felt no longer posed a risk to public health. But as you folks who do read the news now, we are continuing to deal with these problems and doing recalls when we find some products that are out there for consumer use are possibly contaminated by pesticide residues. So those continue. Unfortunately, we thought this would kind of die down after a while, but it has not. So that's something that we still continue to work through as a collaborative city approach.
And so while all this was going on, and Marley's figuring out the ins and outs of law, and Molly's overseeing everybody and making sure they're doing what their assigned job duties are, we had to figure out how do all of these different agencies interact and relate. And who do we call when we find contaminated plants, and who's going to call who? And it was between us and the Department of Ag and the MED, the State Medical Marijuana Enforcement Division, the Fire Department, and Environmental Health. And this is where Natia came in with helping us with these business processes. And this is probably about the 4th version, right?
Yeah, this was actually one of the earlier versions, and so, I mean, the process was changing because we were learning things new, like literally overnight. So this is one of the earlier versions. I think about a week later, if you want to click again, twice actually, I think, you can see one of the later versions of where this ended up going. And so this was actually one of the more simplified, I think, versions. But it was very complex, and literally every day, a new process kind of came out to who was going to do what and when. So.
Fire hose, seriously.
And then Dan was handling all the communications piece, and we were getting tons of calls from the media and the industry as well.
Yeah, so March 13th, 2015, that is when this became public. And we sent a bulletin to the industry, just a friendly little reminder that you must follow pesticide label instructions. And I don't know who of you have ever used MailChimp before, but right before you send an email campaign, there's like a big red launch button, and it felt like we were about to detonate something, and we did. And there was a very strong immediate reaction to that as well. Lots of questions. I'd say the majority of them were good-natured, and what we've seen throughout all of this has been an amazing level of compliance. But there were those criticisms. There was political pressure immediately coming to the mayor's office from the industry. There was immediate challenges to our authority, whether or not we even knew what we were talking about, and if we know what we're doing, if we have the authority to be doing what we're doing, if we have the jurisdictional ability to do it. But we have Marley, so we were good. From there, it was really about meeting and bringing folks together to answer those questions. We met with industry representatives, actual facility operators themselves, brought everyone to the table as much as possible to sort of work through the process to try to distill those flowcharts down into what the city is doing. That sort of communication has not slowed down. That's still happening today. There's still bulletins going out. There's still check-in meetings happening all the time. The media piece of it was pretty amazing to me. Someone who's been doing media relations for 10 years or more now. I've never seen anything like it, just in terms of the scope and the amount of interest from around the world. Was really interesting, and having to mind my P's and Q's as much as possible, and not slipping up when it was your 4th interview of the day, talking about the exact same process was definitely a challenge for me. And I think once we were sort of through that initial phase, we had 11 different grow facilities that had holds placed on plants, many of them thousands and thousands of plants. And once you're at that point, you're balancing a tenuous situation with people who have millions of dollars on the line against consumers who are scared about what they're buying, frankly, and then the legal ramifications of that. So basically keeping her cool and saying, yeah, we got this, we know what we're doing, was the job there. And I think on the next slide, there's just a quick sort of recap of some of this, and the 6 meetings with industry groups and the seminars that Marley did on worker protection standard. All of these, a meeting with the consumers group, a very small, tense, facilitated meeting with industry, followed by a very large, facilitated educational meeting to talk through the processes. All of this is just to say that each one of these meetings started out really tense and ended up with a lot of thank yous, and each one of them was very much worth it in terms of the time and effort we spent working through this process, because frankly it put a face to the name of the regulators and brought the temperature of the room down each and every time.
And I think the biggest issue was this wasn't like we were shutting down a food truck for 2 days. When we put these holds on these plants, at least for one business, it was $6 million worth of their plants. So the numbers were high, but the processes were still exactly the same. We still had the obligation to protect public health regardless of the value of that property. And I think what Dan said, and at the end, he organized a 200-person meeting for just all of the industry, for us to sit up there and tell them exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, doing the education, and that just went so far with them and sort of trying to rebuild that trust after them, really, frankly, being shocked and nervous about losing their businesses right out of the gate. So I think that that pesticide thing kind of helps to summarize our job duties and why we do what we do, and it really is one where it kind of all did play out. We really all did have a big role to play, but we also use the kind of expertise we have. We're using it every day. Every day, Natia is working on some type of business process to help the industry or to streamline licensing. Every day, Marley is running around all of us and helping guide guide the different agencies and keep us, within the law. Molly's also just coordinating all the agencies, and Dan, well, he put on this whole symposium, so the level of work he's engaged in. So that is it for our presentation. We have about 30 minutes for questions, and we have microphones right there, 2 right there. So any questions?
It's always the first that goes, right? So the 3.5% tax that you guys voted on, was that enough? That's the question, because as you guys are doing all this, it seems like that could have been higher potentially.
Yes, so in 2015, I think it was 6.9 million that we've allocated out across the different agencies and departments, and it was projected to be around 10 million. I think we're increasing that in 2016 a little bit. I think it's going to be around 8 million that we're budgeted to spend, but the revenue that we're bringing in from those 2 sources is also increasing, probably closer to 10.5. So we're still spending a little bit less than what those 2 revenue sources are bringing in.
Is this slideshow, can it be available to everybody?
Yeah, all of the presentations that we're doing over the next 2 days will be on the website by next week.
Good morning. My name is Marty Otanyas. I'm a professor in the anthropology department at UC Denver. I appreciate all the information you're sharing, and this is very enlightening. I just have 2 questions, and it's part of my the process of me educating myself and my students about pesticides and also the implementation. So as I develop a genealogy of the policies, there's 2 questions. The first one is, what was the justification of not requiring pesticide testing of medical marijuana? That's one question I'm interested to know about. And then do you see a problem where when testing happens, a facility chooses what sample to send for testing, and potentially owners would choose the optimal piece to be tested? So in terms of implementation or the design, is there a flaw, or what do you see as the remedy to this specific issue?
I'll try to speak to a little bit of that. So the required testing for marijuana is actually on the state level. And I know there's some folks from the Marijuana Enforcement Division in here that know the answer better than I do, but so I can't answer as to why. So for the rest of you in the room who may not know, under state statute and MED, Marijuana Enforcement Division regulations, testing is only required for recreational marijuana, not for medical marijuana. It doesn't seem intuitive, right? Medical marijuana is going to sick people. It should be tested as well. I don't know why that is. I don't know if there are changes in the works or any of that. I know that folks from the state are presenting tomorrow morning, so that might be a great question for them. So as far as the required testing, that's out of our jurisdiction, frankly. As far as sampling, the sampling process we used in Denver as we worked through this pesticide issue, when we became aware of a possible pesticide, a crop that might be contaminated with pesticide residues, we would then also file a complaint with the Department of Agriculture to let them know under their separate authority and separate jurisdiction they could start their own investigation. They would send in their investigators who would then do their own sampling using their own protocols. And I know there are folks here from the Department of Agriculture if you want to ask about those protocols. As we worked through the holds, though, here on the Denver level, we did have a marijuana licensed lab come in, and the lab would do the testing or do the sampling of the plants. It would not be the facility doing the sampling of the plants. So we were very aware that there might be a sampling integrity problem if we let the facility do it. So that's the protocol that we worked out as the pesticide residues degraded, and then that lab would come in and do the sampling.
Okay.
That's kind of how we worked through it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi there, Victor Salinas from Portland, Oregon. A question on a point that you made early on in terms of the banning of butane hash oil extraction or non-commercial extraction. If you could speak more on its effectiveness and whether or not you considered actually banning pressurized butane sales in Denver, as opposed to, or in addition to the banning of non-commercial use?
So if I have your question right, I can explain what our ordinance says. We drafted the ordinance, it was late last summer, it went into effect last October, because in response to the hash oil explosions that we were seeing in Colorado. In Denver alone, last year we had 8 explosions by April. In Colorado we had 33 plus. I lost track after 33, but we had at least 33 last year. So we recognized very early and quickly that we had a problem. There was a public health problem that we needed to address on a local level. So our ordinance, we had to again educate. All of this is drinking from a fire hose. We're trying to educate ourselves on what is hash oil, how is it produced, what is this stuff called butane, you know, all these things. And so what we learned about hash oil extraction is that people were taking canisters of butane that you can buy at Home Depot or Ace Hardware, and they push the butane through the vegetation and extract the hash oil out of the plant. Butane's very heavy. It pools around your feet. It's very flammable. It has a negative 67 degree flash point, I think, something to that effect. So it will ignite at room temperature. And so people doing this at home, in apartment buildings or next to their neighbor's backyard was not good. We call that open blast hash oil production. So that's the thing that we wanted to get our arms around and stop. And that's what our ordinance addresses, is if you're going to do basically solvent-based hash oil extraction, you can't do it outside of a licensed facility. Inside licensed facilities, there are very strict regulations around this. They can do solvent-based extractions. They have to do it in a closed-loop system where the butane is constantly recollected and it's supposedly never released to the atmosphere, although Natia touched on the fact that we were finding it is being released to the atmosphere, and so we made some adjustments there on our extraction room requirements. But open blast was completely releasing it to the atmosphere, and we needed to stop that. Have those explosions, we haven't had any since those 8 last year, I don't believe, in Denver at least. I know we still find them. I'm looking over at Lieutenant Henning. I think we still find them. I'm not sure that they're in the numbers that we were seeing. And then again, the 36 plant ordinance, again, and I'll touch on this again more tomorrow, but we were seeing these massive non-licensed grows because of some of the verbiage in both Amendment 20 and Amendment 64. That we were seeing these massive non-licensed grows in warehouses in Denver, thousands and thousands of plants that were unlicensed, unregulated, and we needed to get our arms around that too. So I think part of your question was, has it made a difference? As far as I know, it's hard to know because they're unlicensed and we don't know about them until we hear about, complaints about them. But I think probably in the law enforcement section tomorrow, Lieutenant Henning will touch on some of that.
Well, and what was interesting as we move forward with a ban on home hash oil extractions is we still don't have the science now to know what type of cannabinoids can be made from what type of strain. And people could argue, well, I have to make my family's hash oil because my brother or someone is sick, and only I know how to make this particular strain to keep my brother healthy. And that was a really hard one to combat because they couldn't prove it one way or the other, and we couldn't disprove it. And that was an issue that we struggled with at City Council, and at the end, You know, I mean, one of the things we said in Denver, we have, like I said, you know, 1,000 licenses. We have over 200 shops. There's plenty of people to go, plenty of places for individuals to go buy hash oil. You know, and ultimately the city council did go with that, but we had people that came and wanted to talk about it and say that we were going to, you know, that this was going to be harmful for their child. And actually, with one of those, we did, you know, this is because we're learning, right? You know, we went to this individual's house. We brought the fire department with us. We went, this man showed us how he made his home hash oil for his child. We looked through it. The fire department told him an easier way or another way that would be safer. And then we sort of had the Mr. Wilson Amendment. So we had, you know, we banned solvent-based hash oil extractions unless you do it in this way with alcohol, this limited amount of alcohol, and with no heat applied. So it was really a work in progress as we're learning and trying to make sure, too, our Constitution allows for people to process marijuana, and that's in our Constitution. So we were looking for a law that was narrowly tailored to address the safety issues, but still would allow people to extract hash oil at home if they could do it safely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Yes.
Hi. You mentioned that your business location requirements are in your licensing code versus your zoning code, and that was a conscious decision. I'm just curious to hear the reasoning behind that.
I wish I could answer that. I don't know. I'm not either a zoning lawyer. I'm becoming all of these kinds of lawyers very quickly. But one of the things that, so here's kind of a wrinkle also for Denver. At the same time we were putting our medical marijuana code together in 2010, we were absolutely revamping our entire zoning code, which perfect storm of craziness. And so in our new zoning code, there's what's called uses, land uses, and there was a lot of discussion about whether or not to create an entire new use for marijuana. Do we just use what we have and the descriptions that we have, or do we create an entire new use, and that's how we're going to locate these businesses throughout our city? Ultimately, and I don't know, I wasn't involved in those discussions, ultimately the decision was made that we were not going to create a new use for marijuana specifically, but that we would reference the zoning code in our licensing code. So for example, the licensing code says retail marijuana stores can be located in any zone district where retail sales are allowed under the zoning code. So it's created, and I know Stacy over there is smiling at me. She's our Director of Excise and Licenses, because it's created a difficulty for the licensing techs. Now they have to become like little mini zoning experts, and it's a difficult way to structure a licensing code. But we've worked through it. We're working through it. But that's just one of the decisions that was made as far as locating businesses in our city.
Anyone else?
I just have a quick question. Hannah Wood, I work with compliance and operations at Can Labs, which is a testing facility here. For Natia, you know, we've seen data collection in various forms, right? And to us, it seems like it's been super beneficial in this kind of pioneer process. So what would your advice be, or moving forward, kind of, you know, how can we benefit as a community, and what kind of collection would you see being the most beneficial?
I mean, my understanding is that every individual, every group has a different set of data that they want, and I think that, quite frankly, the more open data we have, the better off we'll all be. So that dashboard that I showed you, Denver, by the end of the year, is going to make that public facing, and just say, you know what, let's just give you all of our data, whether you use it or you don't use it. Doesn't matter, it's just out there. So I think that the more people, whether they're working for a hospital or operations or in crime, that just put their data out there for anybody to use, I think that's going to be where we're best off, if that answers your question. Yeah.
And I can say, I'm not the data person, she can vouch for that, but I can say if you can think of a question about marijuana, you're going to get it. People are curious. People want to know every little aspect about it, and I think Dan's scenarios about his 3 phone calls in 10 minutes underlines that. You're going to get the questions.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Adam Grossman. I was just wondering if there's any discussion or thought around the issues of growing at home and enforcement of the 6-plant rule, and just what the thought process is around the best way to create a safe environment and allow people to grow at home.
So in Denver, as everybody in Colorado, everybody's entitled to grow their own 6 plants recreationally, or if you're a medical patient and you have a waiver, you could grow more plants than the 6. And if you have, and there's also an argument that you could also grow plants for friends. So what we've done in Denver is at homes, we have a zoning restriction that doesn't matter how many adults you have living in your house who could grow their 6 plants, and doesn't matter how many plants you have authority to grow. In a residential district, you can grow no more than 12 plants at home. And they have to be in a fully enclosed locked space. So then what we wound up seeing is what Marley was referring to. People were realizing they could only grow 12 at home, so they were starting to move into industrial warehouse spaces. And they weren't licensed businesses. They were just friends growing together, maybe caregivers in a caregiver model, growing for patients, maybe just somebody growing for a number of their friends. And we legalized on January 1st, 2014, and by mid-year, Lieutenant Henning and his team, Aaron and Paul, they were starting to see these unlicensed warehouses up to 2,000 plants getting larger and larger and larger. Number one, obviously for the police department, that was a concern about diversion. And the Constitution was still, if people were saying, I have my red card or I'm going for my friends, the officers really didn't have much to charge these individuals with. But also our fire department. In these totally non-regulated grows, we were seeing significant fire safety hazards, whether it was blocked doors and egresses and overloaded electrical and lights mishung, or with the water in there, a lot of fire hazards. So that was one of the ordinances we passed, and that again was tricky and took some time. But we said at home you can only grow 12 plants, and outside of a licensed facility and not at home, you're limited to 36.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Devin Granberry. I'm the city manager of Sheridan, Colorado, just to the southwest of Denver here. And we are currently opted out of both medical and retail, but we're going to be looking at those. So first, I wanted to say thank you very much, because this is invaluable for us in that discussion moving forward. I had a question, though, that popped up. It came from the tour last night. And I asked one of the dispensaries we were at if you could change one thing, what would it be? And they mentioned the hours of operation. So currently, if I understand them correctly, they're required to close at 7 p.m. as far as retail sales, I believe. So that was their one thing. And maybe you could talk about whether that's under consideration to change, or how did you come to decide 7 p.m. was a good time? Because I can see my council having this discussion going, when do we close them down? So thank you.
Yeah, the historical background on that was when medical was first put into code, the hours of operation for medical marijuana was to be 8 till 7. And then when retail was adopted, the state legislature said your hours could be 8 till midnight. So in Denver, we had that choice, what were we going to do? And at that time, as we adopted retail, we said, let's keep them consistent. Retail and medical will both be 8 to 7. Then very recently, I think 6 months ago, the state revised that law, and now retail can stay open till midnight. So we're in this position right now where Denver could extend the hours of operation if we wanted to. A lot of industry representatives would like to see it happen. They talk about, it'd be more business for them, more tax revenue, more jobs. But one of our issues that's really slowed us down right now is the fact that these stores in Denver have already gone through a public hearing process. In Denver, we have 4 of the stores. They go to a public hearing process. The neighbors can come out and object or not object and say their piece. And we're just sort of struggling with how do we backtrack on that. A couple of years ago, or maybe just 2 years ago, the state looked at doing extending bar hours, having rolling out crowds for safety issues, and the neighbors really were not happy about that. It had not gone through a public process. So the neighbor piece is a sticking point for us right now. We do know that crime around the dispensaries, the stores, has not been very significant. But But we're wondering is it not significant because they close at 7 and most of the time crime occurs under the cover of darkness. So right now that issue is not a priority for us. We're dealing with some other safety issues and some other time-sensitive things, but we know it's out there for the industry and we're still in conversations with them. Yes, hi Kevin.
Hi, Kevin Mamology, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. First off, thank you guys for putting this together. I think the information's been great so far, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day and tomorrow. My question is about the smellometer. We know early on when legalization first happened, there was a lot of complaints about the smells from grow facilities, and we also saw what looked like a megaphone that someone held up next to their nose. And anyways, my question to you guys, where are we at with that? Are there still complaints, or have we deployed the smellometer much?
Well, first of all, it was a nasal ranger, Kevin. Nasal ranger.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that is something also that's on our agenda that we've been looking at. Other area, the city's looking at that as a whole. With marijuana specifically, we're not involved in any of those discussions right now. But yeah, odors from grows is definitely an issue. It's a quality of life issue. We know that there are measures that can mitigate those odors. I mean, there are some pretty good, filtering systems that actually work really well. Our first go through has been to get voluntary compliance with the industry, and we had a lot of that at the beginning. As we come through the first year, the replacement of those filters is really expensive, and not everybody's making that choice to replace them right now. So it's something that's being looked at the city as a whole. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Taylor West. I'm with the National Cannabis Industry Association. Kind of piggybacking off of that question, I'm curious to hear a little bit, if you would share a little bit about how you found the process of working with the stakeholders within the industry as you developed and then also adapted and changed the regulations, and what you might recommend for others as to how to kind of bring those people into the process.
Great, thank you, Taylor. Yes, they have been key for us. We've worked both with Kevin, and Taylor's been involved in a couple other things. We have a number of industry groups here, and I know some of you guys went on a tour with some of the industry groups. One of the main reasons why it's been key is because we don't know everything. We didn't, as Marley was saying, we don't know how you extract hash oil. We don't know what a hash oil machine was. So it was really fire at first, working directly with the industry to learn, what is this? How does it work? Let's go through it. What are other evolving processes? What do we need to be looking at? And working together hand in hand in the industry. And really, I mean, we have some very responsible business owners that have been a joy to work with. I know when we were kind of talking about pesticides, we were talking about a lot of people who were upset with us because it was hitting their bottom dollar. But in general, I think our relationship with the industry has allowed us to be as successful as we are and to really learn a lot from them. So great question.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh wait, and Marley would like to add.
And I just want to point out for the rest of you folks who are considering, opting in or it's on your doorstep, 20-year prosecutor, these guys can vouch for this too. I fought against that. I'm not one for groupthink, but I can tell you that those working groups are invaluable. They are key to you getting your regulations in place. I am a convert. They are invaluable to what you do as you move forward. So just a pitch there.
Yes.
Stephanie Carlisle with the City of Inglewood, and we currently allow medical marijuana. The thing that we're dealing with right now is the social cannabis clubs that are wanting to come in. And so I noticed that tomorrow there's a little bit more discussion on that, but I would just love to see if that's something you're currently dealing with. I mean, we've got a moratorium in place right now, but we're trying to get ahead of that, and just kind of would love your thoughts on that.
That's something that we have been exploring. It was about last spring, last spring, the mayor asked us to start looking at that. And we had held a couple of stakeholder work groups. Then, I don't know if you were following the news, but an initiated ordinance was filed in the city of Denver. So, our work stopped in that area to wait and see what would happen with that initiated ordinance. They pulled that initiated ordinance, and so we're continuing to have those conversations that we had already started. What we want to be smart because if the state, if we go and then the state does something, they could arguably preempt what we did. So we're in conversations with the state to find out where they are, and we'll be looking at that over the next couple of months. And then if they're not, moving on it, our city will be looking at it a lot closer. Thanks. All right. And I think that's it. Oh, wait. Oh, lunch is being served in the hallway. We have boxed lunches in the hallway. So thank you, and we will reconvene at 1.